Camera flashes exploded along the red carpet like lightning trapped in a storm. Among the crowd of reporters, Aurora Vale stood alone, young billionaire in a designer gown, looking lost as the media shouted, "Who are you attending with tonight?" Nearby, a man in a simple shirt was preparing to leave after making his delivery. Aurora grabbed his hand, her voice quiet but firm. "Pretend you're my husband tonight, please." He froze, but when he stepped forward with her, what he did next left the entire ballroom breathless. "Before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching this from. I'd really love to know that." Now let's start. Ethan Brooks had learned to measure his life in the spaces between responsibilities. The brief moments of quiet that existed after Luna was tucked into bed, and before exhaustion pulled him towards sleep that never felt adequate for the demands of single parenthood combined with multiple jobs that barely kept them financially stable. At 31 years old, he had accepted that his dreams of finishing his engineering degree would remain permanently deferred. That advancement meant picking up extra delivery shifts rather than climbing corporate ladders. That success was defined by keeping his 7-year-old daughter fed, clothed, and loved rather than accumulating wealth or status. The evening delivery to Vale Tower represented the kind of job Ethan normally avoided because high-end events meant dealing with demanding clients who treated delivery drivers like servants rather than service providers. But the payment was generous enough to cover Luna's upcoming school field trip and the new winter coat she needed, but would never ask for because she had learned too young to recognize the worry lines around her father's eyes when money was tight. Aurora Vale's panic was visible even from across the lobby, her composed public image cracking under pressure that Ethan couldn't immediately identify, but recognized as genuine distress rather than wealthy person's annoyance at minor inconvenience. She stood near the entrance to the ballroom where a product launch event was clearly underway. Photographers and reporters forming a gauntlet she seemed unable or unwilling to navigate alone. The jewelry delivery had been straightforward, a signed receipt and professional thank you from Aurora's assistant. But Ethan found himself lingering near the lobby's edge when he should have been rushing to his next delivery, drawn by curiosity about why someone who commanded such obvious wealth and power appeared so vulnerable in this moment. Aurora's decision happened in seconds, her eyes scanning the lobby with desperation that transformed into determination when they landed on Ethan. She crossed the distance between them with purpose that suggested she'd made some kind of calculation and arrived at conclusion that required his participation, whether he understood the stakes or not. "I need your help," Aurora said without preamble, her voice carrying urgency that bypassed normal social protocols about appropriate ways to address strangers. "My date canceled, emergency situation, but the media expects me to arrive with someone, and if I go in alone, the narrative becomes about my personal life rather than the product launch I've spent 6 months planning." Ethan's confusion must have shown clearly because Aurora continued speaking rapidly, words tumbling out with uncharacteristic lack of polish. "I'll pay you, obviously, 10 times whatever you make in a normal evening of deliveries. All you have to do is walk in with me, sit through dinner, pretend we're together, 2 hours maximum, then you're free to go, and we never speak of this again." The offer was absurd enough that Ethan's first instinct was to refuse, to explain that he had other deliveries scheduled and a daughter waiting at home with the neighbor who charged by the hour for childcare. But something about Aurora's desperation, the way her hands trembled slightly despite her attempt at commanding tone, reminded him of Luna during her first day of kindergarten when she'd been terrified but trying so hard to be brave. "Okay," Ethan heard himself saying before careful consideration could intervene. "But I'm not dressed for whatever this event is, and I don't know anything about pretending to be someone's date at a billionaire's party." Relief flooded Aurora's features so completely that she appeared years younger, the carefully maintained public persona cracking to reveal genuine gratitude. "You look fine. Better than fine, actually. The slightly rumpled look makes you seem approachable rather than corporate. Just follow my lead. Be yourself, and please don't mention that we met literally 5 minutes ago." The transformation as they approached the red carpet was remarkable, Aurora's panic disappearing behind practiced smile, while her hand found Ethan's arm with pressure that communicated both gratitude and nervousness. Camera flashes exploded with intensity that made Ethan squint, reporters shouting questions that blurred together into incomprehensible noise. "Ms. Vale, who is your companion tonight?" Is this the mysterious boyfriend you've been keeping private? Can you tell us his name? Ethan felt Aurora tense beside him, her smile becoming slightly strained as the questions intensified. Before she could respond, he found himself speaking with calm that surprised him, given the absurdity of the situation. I'm her husband, he said simply, the lie emerging with conviction he hadn't known he possessed. We've been keeping our relationship quiet for obvious reasons, but Aurora wanted me here tonight for this important launch. The statement created a moment of stunned silence before the questions erupted with renewed intensity, but Aurora was already moving forward, pulling Ethan through the gauntlet of media with practiced efficiency that suggested she'd navigated similar situations countless times before. Once inside the ballroom, away from the cameras and shouting reporters, she turned to him with expression combining shock and admiration. Husband, Aurora repeated, her voice carrying something between amusement and disbelief. That's a much bigger commitment than date. We'll never be able to walk that back convincingly. Would you have preferred I said boyfriend? Ethan asked, suddenly uncertain whether he'd made situation worse rather than better. You look like you needed someone to take charge of the narrative, and husband seemed more likely to shut down the invasive questions. Aurora studied him for a moment before her expression softened into genuine smile that transformed her face from merely beautiful to something approaching radiant. No, you're right. Husband is actually perfect because it explains why they have never seen me with you before and why I'm not offering details. Thank you for thinking fast. The evening unfolded with surreal quality, Ethan finding himself seated at a table surrounded by people whose net worth exceeded anything he could comprehend, making small talk about business ventures and market trends he understood only in the most abstract terms. But something about his complete lack of pretension, his honest admission when asked direct questions, that he worked multiple jobs to support his daughter, seemed to disarm people accustomed to everyone angling for advantage or trying to impress them. Aurora watched him throughout dinner with expression Ethan couldn't quite interpret, something between curiosity and wonder, as though he represented a puzzle she was trying to solve. When photographers approached their table for pose shots, Ethan found himself responding with instinctive protectiveness, shifting his position to shield Aurora from the worst of the flash glare, his hand resting naturally on her shoulder in a gesture that would photograph as intimate rather than awkward. You're really good at this, Aurora murmured during a brief moment of relative privacy between courses. The protective husband thing. It doesn't feel fake. I'm a dad, Ethan replied with slight shrug. After you've dealt with a 7-year-old's nightmares and school bullies and all the other things that scare kids, pretending to be someone's supportive partner at a fancy party isn't particularly challenging. The answer made Aurora laugh, genuine and unguarded, drawing curious glances from nearby tables who had rarely heard the notoriously serious CEO express such open amusement. What's your daughter's name? She asked, genuine interest replacing the polite curiosity most people used when asking about children. Luna, Ethan said, his entire demeanor softening in ways that Aurora noticed and filed away for later consideration. She's 7, loves science and art in equal measure, currently obsessed with learning everything about the solar system. She wants to be an astronaut when she grows up, though last week she also wanted to be a veterinarian, and the week before that was all about becoming a chef. The paternal pride in his voice, the way his face completely transformed when talking about his daughter, created sharp contrast with the polished but emotionally distant people Aurora typically surrounded herself with. Here was someone whose wealth was measured not in assets or investments, but in relationship with another human being, who valued time spent reading bedtime stories over networking at events like this one. As the evening drew toward its conclusion, Aurora found herself reluctant to let Ethan leave, to return to the isolation of her penthouse where success was measured by quarterly earnings rather than genuine human connection. Thank you, she said finally as they prepared to exit together, maintaining the illusion of a couple leaving in unison, for saving me from what would have been a disaster of an evening. It wasn't as terrible as I expected, Ethan admitted with a smile that made Aurora's heart do something unexpected in her chest. Though I should probably get home. Luna's with the neighbor, and I don't like being away longer than necessary. After him, they paused at the lobby entrance, aware that leaving separately would undermine the narrative they'd constructed, but uncertain how to properly conclude this strange arrangement. Finally, Aurora pulled out her phone and handed it to Ethan. Put your number in, she said impulsively. Not for anything weird, just, I should probably pay you for tonight and I don't have that much cash on me right now. Ethan entered his contact information before returning the phone, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. You don't have to pay me, he said quietly. You looked like you needed help, and I was available. That's enough. The refusal of payment, the simple declaration that helping someone in distress was its own reward, represented a value system so foreign to Aurora's experience that she found herself speechless as Ethan waved goodbye and headed toward the parking garage where his aging sedan waited among the luxury vehicles belonging to other guests. Standing alone in the lobby after he'd gone, Aurora realized that for the first time in years, she'd spent an evening feeling genuinely seen as a person rather than just a position or a net worth figure. And that realization kept her awake long into the night, turning over possibilities that logic said were impossible, but her heart insisted were worth exploring. If you were Aurora, someone who only believed in money and reputation, could you believe a stranger might change your heart in just one night? Share your thoughts below. The morning after the gala brought exactly the media firestorm Aurora had simultaneously hoped for and dreaded, though the focus had shifted dramatically from product launch to personal revelation. Headlines screamed variations on billionaire Aurora Vale's secret marriage, and mystery man revealed as Vale's husband, accompanied by photographs capturing moments from the previous evening that looked convincingly intimate despite their completely fabricated foundation. Aurora sat in her office reviewing the coverage with mixture of satisfaction and growing panic, recognizing that the narrative had escaped her control in ways that would be difficult to manage without either confirming the lie and continuing the charade or confessing the deception and facing mockery for the elaborate theatrical performance. Her PR team was frantically trying to determine the best strategy while board members sent increasingly urgent messages demanding explanation and clarification. The truth was that Aurora couldn't stop thinking about Ethan Brooks, about his calm presence amid chaos and the way he'd spoken about his daughter with devotion that money couldn't buy. She had his phone number but no legitimate reason to use it beyond transferring the payment he'd refused. No socially acceptable excuse for prolonging contact with someone she'd hired for one evening's performance. But then the tabloid articles began digging deeper, some enterprising reporter discovering that the mystery husband was actually a delivery driver, working multiple jobs to support his daughter as a single parent. The narrative transformed overnight from romantic secret to potential scandal, speculation ranging from whether Aurora was being manipulated by someone after her money to whether she was having some kind of breakdown that required board intervention. Aurora made her decision during an emergency board meeting where longtime associates suggested she immediately distance herself from Ethan, release a statement clarifying that he'd been merely filling in as escort for public appearance, and that reports of marriage were media exaggeration. The suggestion was practical and would solve her immediate PR problem while protecting the company from potential fallout. No, Aurora said, the word emerging with finality that surprised everyone, including herself. I'm not throwing him under the bus because we created a story that the media ran with. If there's going to be a statement, it needs to acknowledge my role in this situation and protect him from becoming a punchline. Her assistant Marcus intervened with information that would have been helpful earlier. Ms. Vale, someone's been digging into Mr. Brooks's background. They found his address, his daughter's school. They're preparing to publish details about his financial situation and essentially paint him as gold digger, despite the fact that he refused payment for last night. The protective fury that flooded through Aurora at the thought of Ethan, and especially Luna being subjected to media scrutiny and harassment, made her decision even clearer. She grabbed her phone and dialed Ethan's number before anyone could talk her out of the impulse. Hello? His voice carried wariness, suggesting he'd already seen some of the coverage and was bracing for consequences. I need to see you, Aurora said without preamble. The media situation is escalating, and I need to figure out how to handle this without letting them turn you and your daughter into collateral damage. Can you meet me? The coffee shop Ethan suggested was aggressively ordinary, a neighborhood place where the coffee was good and the atmosphere was comfortable rather than impressive. Aurora arrived dressed in jeans and a sweater rather than her usual designer professional attire, attempting to blend in with surroundings where her usual wardrobe would have attracted exactly the attention she was trying to avoid. Ethan was already there, looking tired in ways that suggested he hadn't slept much after the gala either. "I'm sorry about this," he said immediately as Aurora slid into the booth across from him. "I should have thought through the implications before making up the husband story. Now you're dealing with cleanup I created." "You saved me from what would have been a disaster of an evening," Aurora corrected firmly. "And now I'm going to make sure you and Luna don't suffer consequences for helping me. I've dealt with media manipulation before. I know how to manage this." But even as she spoke with confidence, Aurora recognized that the situation had become more complicated than simple PR management. She couldn't stop looking at Ethan, noticing details she'd been too stressed to fully register at the gala. The genuine kindness in his eyes and the careful attention he paid to everything she said, and the complete absence of any agenda beyond helping someone who needed assistance. "Tell me about Luna," Aurora found herself saying, the request emerging before a professional filter could stop it. "Tell me what she's like, what matters to her, what makes her happy." Ethan's entire demeanor transformed as he began describing his daughter, the animation in his voice and the pride in his expression, creating a picture of devotion that made Aurora's chest tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. He talked about Luna's latest school project building a model solar system from recycled materials, about her insistence on reading books about female scientists because she wanted role models who looked like her, about how she'd recently declared that she wanted to adopt all the dogs at the local shelter because they needed families just like she and her dad were a family. "She sounds extraordinary," Aurora said when Ethan paused, genuine admiration coloring her words. "She's everything," Ethan agreed simply, the statement carrying weight that transcended whatever monetary value Aurora might place on relationships. "She's why I work 3 jobs and why I turn down opportunities that would mean less time with her. Nothing matters more than making sure she grows up knowing she's loved and valued and capable of achieving whatever dreams she sets her mind to." Whew. The philosophy represented such stark contrast to Aurora's own upbringing, where material provision had been abundant, but emotional presence had been scarce, where her parents had prepared her for business success, but never taught her what mattered beyond professional achievement. She found herself envying Luna for having a father who understood what truly mattered, who prioritized presence over presence and connection over career advancement. Their conversation extended far beyond the initial meeting's intended scope. Coffee cups refilled multiple times while they talked about everything from childhood experiences to current challenges to hopes for futures that looked very different on surface but shared surprising common ground in fundamental values about what made life worth living. When Aurora finally returned to her office hours later than planned, she found her perspective had shifted in ways that made returning to usual business concerns feel hollow and insufficient. She had built an empire, accumulated wealth that most people couldn't comprehend, achieved every professional goal she'd set for herself, yet sitting in a coffee shop talking with a delivery driver who measured success by his daughter's happiness had felt more meaningful than any board meeting or business deal. That evening, instead of working late as she typically did, Aurora found herself researching the neighborhood where Ethan lived, discovering it was the kind of area where people knew their neighbors and children, played in shared courtyards, and community mattered more than individual achievement. The small restaurant where Ethan mentioned working part-time shifts looked welcoming in its modest simplicity, the kind of place where food was good and prices were reasonable and regular customers were greeted by name. Aurora made a decision that her rational business mind insisted was foolish, but her heart insisted was necessary. She would go to that restaurant, would find ways to be part of Ethan and Luna's world, rather than expecting them to navigate her intimidating professional sphere. She would learn what life looked like when measured by genuine human connection, rather than quarterly earnings and stock valuations. The next morning, Aurora walked into her regular board meeting and announced her intention to step back from daily operational management, to transition into advisory role that allowed her to pursue other interests while maintaining strategic oversight of the company she'd built. The shock was palpable. Board members arguing that this was exactly the kind of impulsive decision-making they'd warned against, that her judgment had been compromised by whatever was happening in her personal life. But Aurora had never been more certain of a decision in her life. She was done letting other people's opinions and expectations dictate how she lived, done measuring worth by metrics that left her feeling empty despite all her success. If she wanted chance at the kind of genuine happiness she'd glimpsed in Ethan's descriptions of his life with Luna, she needed to be brave enough to change everything. The restaurant where Ethan worked evening shifts occupied a corner storefront in a neighborhood where gentrification hadn't yet driven out the longtime residents, where the menu featured comfort food rather than cuisine, and prices reflected the economic reality of the community rather than what the market might bear in wealthier areas. Aurora felt conspicuous entering in her business attire after work, overdressed for surroundings where most patrons wore casual clothes that showed the wear of being washed and worn repeatedly. Ethan's surprise at seeing her was evident, his expression cycling through confusion and concern before settling on something that might have been pleasure. "Aurora, what are you doing here?" "You said you worked here some evenings," she replied, aiming for casual but landing somewhere closer to nervous. "I thought I might try the food, maybe talk more about how we're handling the media situation." The excuse was transparent enough that Ethan's slight smile suggested he saw through it, but was kind enough not to call out the obvious fabrication. "Sit anywhere you like. I'll bring you a menu in a minute." Aurora chose a booth near the window where she could watch the neighborhood's evening routine. Parents walking home from picking up children at nearby schools, elderly residents taking advantage of cooler temperatures for evening walks. The kind of community interaction that existed in her luxury building only as polite nods in elevator rides. When Ethan returned with the menu and water glass, she found herself asking questions that had nothing to do with food choices. "Do you like it here? Working in this neighborhood? Being part of this community?" Ethan settled into the booth across from her, apparently deciding that treating her as regular customer was less authentic than acknowledging the unusual nature of a billionaire showing up at his workplace. "I love it here," he said simply. "People know me, know Luna, look out for us. When I'm running late picking her up from school, Mrs. Chen from upstairs makes sure she gets home safely. When money's tight at the end of the month, Marco, who owns this place, lets me take home leftovers that would otherwise go to waste. It's not wealth, but it's richness of a different kind." The distinction resonated with Aurora in ways that undermined everything she'd built her identity around. "I have a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the entire city," she heard herself admitting. "But I don't know any of my neighbors' names. I've lived there 5 years and I couldn't tell you a single thing about the people on my floor, beyond what cars they drive and what they're wearing when we pass in the hallway." "That sounds lonely," Ethan observed without judgment, simple acknowledgement that isolation existed even in luxury spaces. "It is," Aurora agreed, the admission feeling like confession. "I've spent so long focused on building my career and growing my wealth that I forgot to build an actual life. And then I met you, saw how you are with Luna and how you interact with people here, and I realized I've been measuring success using completely wrong metrics." Their conversation was interrupted by a small whirlwind entering the restaurant. Luna spotting her father and racing toward him with the kind of uninhibited joy that adults had learned to suppress in public spaces. She stopped short when she noticed Aurora, her expression shifting to curious assessment. "Dad, is this the lady from your pretend wedding?" Luna asked with the blunt directness that characterized children who hadn't yet learned social filters. "You look even prettier than in the pictures on Dad's phone." Aurora laughed despite the embarrassment of learning that Ethan had saved photos from the gala, charmed by Luna's honesty and the lack of intimidation most adults showed in her presence. "I'm Aurora," she said, extending her hand formally before realizing how ridiculous the gesture was with a 7-year-old. "And you must be Luna. Your dad has told me a lot about you." "Good things, I hope," Luna said seriously, shaking Aurora's hand with exaggerated formality that suggested she was mimicking adult behavior she'd observed. "Because I'm a very good kid most of the time, except when I forget to clean my room or when I eat too much candy and get hyper." The matter-of-fact self-assessment made Aurora smile, recognizing in Luna the same genuine authenticity that characterized Ethan's interactions. "He told me you want to be an astronaut," Aurora said. "That's a pretty amazing dream." "Or a veterinarian," Luna corrected. "Or maybe both. Dad says I don't have to choose yet, that I can explore lots of different interests before deciding what I want to be when I grow up." "What do you do?" The question was innocent but surprisingly difficult to answer in ways that a 7-year-old would find interesting or comprehensible. "I run a company that invests in other companies," Aurora began, then paused at Luna's confused expression. "I help people who have good ideas but need money to make their ideas real." Like a fairy godmother, but with business instead of magic, Luna declared, apparently satisfied with her interpretation. That's cool. Can you help my dad? He has really good ideas, but he says we can't afford to do most of them because money has to go to important stuff like rent and food and my school supplies. The casual revelation of their financial constraints, delivered without shame or self-pity by a child who accepted their circumstances as simply the reality of her life, made Aurora's chest tight with emotions she struggled to name. Before she could formulate response, Ethan intervened gently. Luna, that's not really appropriate conversation for someone we just met. Aurora's not here to solve our problems. But maybe she wants to be friends, Luna persisted, with the hopeful optimism that hadn't yet learned that friendship across such vast economic divides was complicated by factors children couldn't understand. You're always saying we should be kind to people and help when we can. Maybe Aurora needs friends too. The simple wisdom in that statement, the recognition that wealth didn't prevent loneliness, and that kindness should flow in all directions, regardless of economic circumstances, struck Aurora with force that made her blink back unexpected tears. You know what, Luna? I think you're absolutely right. I would very much like to be friends with you and your dad. Over the following weeks, Aurora became a regular presence at the restaurant, and gradually in Ethan and Luna's lives more broadly. She helped Luna with a science project about the planets, contributed supplies that she insisted were just extras she had lying around, rather than deliberately purchased gifts that might wound Ethan's pride. She attended Luna's school play and felt her heart swell with vicarious pride when the little girl performed her 3 lines with theatrical flair that suggested future career in drama if the astronaut dreams didn't pan out. The media attention gradually shifted from scandal to human interest story as photographers captured images of Aurora in casual clothes helping Luna at the park, eating at the neighborhood restaurant, participating in community events that billionaires typically avoided. Some outlets praised her for staying grounded despite her wealth. Others questioned whether the whole thing was an elaborate PR stunt designed to rehabilitate her image after the fake marriage revelation. But Aurora found she increasingly didn't care what strangers thought about her choices. For the first time in years, possibly ever, she was building relationships based on genuine affection rather than strategic networking, spending time with people who valued her presence rather than her bank account, measuring days by meaningful interactions rather than business achievements. The shift in perspective affected her professional life in unexpected ways. Aurora began redirecting portions of her wealth toward community development projects in neighborhoods like the one where Ethan lived, funding after-school programs and small business loans, and infrastructure improvements that wouldn't generate impressive returns on investment, but would meaningfully improve people's daily lives. Her board members expressed concern about this departure from pure profit-focused decision-making, but Aurora discovered she had less patience for their objections than she'd expected. We've spent years maximizing shareholder value, she told them during one particularly contentious meeting. Maybe it's time we focused on maximizing human value instead. The philosophical shift represented fundamental change in how Aurora understood her role and responsibilities as someone with significant wealth and influence. She had always believed that business success was its own justification, that making money was the primary purpose of commercial enterprise. But watching Ethan work multiple jobs to provide for Luna while still making time for community involvement in genuine human connection had taught her that wealth without purpose was just expensive emptiness. One evening, as Aurora sat with Ethan and Luna in their small apartment, helping to prepare dinner while music played from a speaker that had seen better days, Luna asked the question that had been building toward this moment for weeks. Aurora, can you be my mom? Because Dad doesn't have a wife, and I don't have a mom, and you're here all the time anyway, and I really like you. And I think Dad likes you too, even though he gets all weird and blushy when I say so. The room fell silent, except for the music. Ethan froze in mid-stir at the stove while Aurora's heart pounded with combination of terror and hope. She looked at Ethan, saw in his expression that Luna's observation wasn't entirely off base, that maybe the feelings developing between them weren't one-sided, even if neither had been brave enough to name them explicitly. That's Luna. That's not really how it works, Ethan began, his voice gentle despite obvious discomfort. Aurora has her own life, her own responsibilities. She's been kind to spend time with us, but that doesn't mean she wants to be part of our family permanently. Why not ask her instead of deciding for her? Luna suggested with the pragmatic logic that children applied to situations adults complicated with overthinking. Aurora, do you want to be part of our family? If you believe that real feelings can start from the briefest moments, subscribe to Solo Parent Stories for more stories that touch your hearts like this. The question hung in the air like a challenge, demanding honesty that would either move relationships forward or destroy the careful balance they'd been maintaining. Aurora looked between Luna's hopeful face and Ethan's carefully neutral expression that didn't quite hide the vulnerability in his eyes, and made a choice that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. I would love to be part of your family, Aurora said quietly, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was ground below or endless fall. If your dad is okay with that, if you both really want me here, not just as friend, but as something more. Luna's shriek of joy was immediate and deafening, the little girl launching herself at Aurora with force that nearly knocked them both over. But Aurora's attention was on Ethan, watching as his careful composure cracked to reveal emotions he'd apparently been suppressing for weeks. Hope and fear, and something that looked like love struggling for dominance in his expression. We should talk, Ethan said finally, his voice rough with emotions he was clearly trying to control. Luna, homework time. Aurora and I need to have a grown-up conversation. Luna's protest was perfunctory, the little girl clearly recognizing that she'd accomplished her goal of forcing the adults to acknowledge what had been building between them. She retreated to her room with exaggerated sighs about homework being boring, leaving Ethan and Aurora alone in the small living room that suddenly felt charged with possibility. I didn't plan this, Ethan said, the words tumbling out with urgency that suggested he'd been rehearsing this speech internally for some time. I didn't invite you into our lives expecting or hoping for anything beyond friendship. But somewhere along the way, between watching you help Luna with her homework and seeing how naturally you fit into our routine, and realizing that I look forward to your visits more than anything else in my week, I fell in love with you. The declaration was so honest and vulnerable that Aurora felt tears prick her eyes, years of emotional armor cracking under the weight of someone genuinely seeing her and choosing her anyway. I fell in love with you too, she admitted. With both of you, actually. With the life you've built and the values you've taught Luna, and the way you make me feel like a person instead of a position. Their first kiss happened without the dramatic build-up that movies suggested was necessary. Just two people moving toward each other with the inevitability of forces that had been building toward this collision. It was gentle and tentative and perfect, tasting of hope and possibility and the promise of something neither had expected but both desperately wanted. The moment was interrupted by Luna calling from her room. Are you kissing? Because if you are, that means you're definitely together, and I can tell my class I have a mom now, right? Their laughter broke the tension, Aurora resting her forehead against Ethan's shoulder, while his arms wrapped around her with strength that suggested he'd been wanting to do this for weeks. Yes, Luna, Ethan called back. You can tell your class whatever you want. Wait, but reality intruded on their happiness within days, as it inevitably did when billionaires dated working-class single parents under media scrutiny that refused to lose interest in the story. A business rival who had been waiting for opportunity to undermine Aurora's position discovered and leaked the truth about the fake marriage, about the fact that Ethan had been a hired delivery driver who Aurora had enlisted for one evening's performance. The headlines were predictably cruel, painting Aurora as either desperately lonely or deliberately manipulative, questioning her judgment and fitness to lead her company. Ethan was portrayed as either a con artist who had successfully manipulated his way into a billionaire's life, or a naive fool being used for publicity purposes he didn't understand. The board demanded Aurora's immediate resignation. Shareholders filed complaints about leadership instability. Competitors circled with predatory interest in a company whose CEO had apparently lost credibility through scandalous personal choices. The pressure was immense and unrelenting, designed to force Aurora into choosing between her professional position and her personal happiness. Ethan offered to disappear, to release a statement explaining that their relationship had been a mistake, and that he was backing away to allow Aurora to focus on her career without distraction. I won't let loving me cost you everything you've built, he said, his voice carrying pain that came from genuinely caring about her well-being more than his own happiness. I can't live with that guilt. No, Aurora said firmly, the word carrying all the certainty that had been missing from her professional life recently. I'm done letting other people's opinions dictate my choices. I'm done pretending that business success matters more than genuine human connection. If they want my resignation, they can have it, but I'm not giving up you and Luna to preserve a position that was making me miserable anyway. The press conference she called shocked everyone. Aurora standing before cameras and reporters with Ethan and Luna beside her, making clear through her physical positioning that this was about family rather than corporate messaging. Yes, Ethan and I initially met through an arrangement where he helped me navigate a difficult social situation, Aurora began, her voice steady despite obvious nervousness. But what started as pretense became the most genuine relationship I've ever experienced. She looked at Ethan, drawing strength from his solid presence. He's a delivery driver who works multiple jobs to support his daughter. He doesn't have wealth or status or any of the things my social circle considers important, but he has integrity, compassion, and the kind of character that makes me want to be a better person. And his daughter has taught me more about what matters in life than any business school ever could. The reporters shouted questions, but Aurora continued speaking, needing to say this publicly before courage failed her. I'm stepping down as CEO of Vail Group to focus on community development work and spending time with the people who actually matter to me. I'll remain on the board in advisory capacity, but my days of measuring worth by quarterly earnings are over. I've learned that you can win every professional battle and still lose everything important if you've forgotten what you're actually fighting for. The ballroom full of reporters fell silent, apparently stunned by such direct acknowledgement of values that contradicted everything successful people were supposed to prioritize. Ethan's hand found Aurora's, squeezing gently in support that didn't require words. Luna, who had been remarkably patient throughout this adult proceeding, chose that moment to speak up with child's perspective that cut through all the complexity. My dad saved Aurora from being alone at a party, and now she saves us from being alone too. That's what families do, right? They save each other. The simple wisdom in that statement, delivered with such innocent certainty, seemed to shift something in the room's atmosphere. Several reporters smiled, the harsh judgment in their expressions softening into something approaching understanding or maybe even approval. 10 months after the press conference that had scandalized business circles and delighted romantic optimists, Aurora stood in the community center that represented her new focus and purpose. The facility had been built with her funding, but designed by people who actually understood what neighborhoods needed, featuring after-school programs, job training resources, and meeting spaces where residents could gather without the pressure of spending money they didn't have. Ethan managed the technical operations, his engineering background finally being used for work that mattered beyond keeping wealthy people's buildings functioning. Luna attended the after-school program 3 days a week, thriving in an environment where learning was celebrated and curiosity was encouraged regardless of students' economic circumstances. The house they'd moved into together was modest by Aurora's previous standards, located in the same neighborhood as the community center, rather than in the exclusive areas where billionaires typically resided. It had a backyard where Luna could play, a kitchen large enough for family dinners, and bedrooms that felt cozy rather than cavernous. Aurora had discovered that downsizing from a penthouse to a regular house didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like finally having a home rather than just an address. The neighbors knew them by name, invited them to block parties, looked after Luna when schedules got complicated in ways that wealthy isolation had never provided. The grand opening of the community center drew local residents rather than business associates, people who would actually use the facility rather than just offering polite compliments before returning to their own neighborhoods. Aurora stood at the entrance, greeting arrivals with genuine warmth that would have seemed impossible to people who'd known her as the Ice Queen CEO. I want to thank everyone for being here today, Aurora said when it was time for official remarks. Luna standing beside her, holding her hand while Ethan watched from the crowd with expression of pride that made Aurora's heart swell. This center exists because I learned from two very special people that real wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with community and connection and caring about each other's well-being. She looked at Ethan, finding strength in his steady presence. 6 months ago, I asked a stranger to pretend to be my husband for one evening because I was too afraid to attend an event alone. What I didn't know was that asking for help would teach me everything I'd been missing about how to actually live rather than just exist. He showed me what it means to measure success by relationships rather than revenue, to value presence over possessions, to understand that the richest life has nothing to do with money. Luna tugged on Aurora's sleeve, clearly having something to add to the speech. Aurora knelt down, bringing herself to the little girl's level while the crowd watched with indulgent smiles. "Can I tell them now?" Luna whispered, though her stage whisper was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tell them what, sweetheart? That you're going to be my real mom soon, not just my pretend mom. Because Dad gave you a ring last night and you said yes, and that means we're going to be a real family forever." The announcement wasn't how Aurora and Ethan had planned to share their engagement news, but Luna's innocent excitement and the crowd's immediate applause made the spontaneous revelation perfect in its own way. Aurora laughed, pulling both Luna and Ethan into an embrace, while the community center erupted in celebration around them. Later, after the opening ceremonies had concluded and most guests had departed to explore the new facility, Aurora found a quiet moment with Ethan on the center's back patio overlooking the playground, where Luna was already making friends with other children. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, the question carrying weight beyond its simple words. "About giving up the CEO position, the penthouse, the status, all of it?" Aurora leaned against him, watching Luna's joyful play with contentment that no business achievement had ever provided. "Not even for a second," she said honestly. "I thought I had everything, but I was empty. Now I have what actually matters, a family, a purpose beyond profit, a life that feels worth living." "I love you," Ethan said simply, the words carrying more value than any corporate deal or investment return ever could. "I love you too," Aurora replied. "Thank you for teaching me that pretending to be married for one night could lead to building something real that matters more than anything I achieved alone." Luna ran over, breathless and happy, throwing her arms around both adults with the unself-conscious affection that characterized children who knew they were loved and valued. "Can we go home now? I want to show you the drawing I made of our family." Home. The word resonated with meaning it had never held when Aurora lived in expensive isolation. Home wasn't a place defined by square footage or property value. It was wherever these two people were, wherever love and laughter and genuine connection existed. They walked together toward the car, three people who had found each other through circumstances that seemed orchestrated by fate or luck, or whatever force brought lonely souls together when they needed each other most. What had started as a desperate request for someone to pretend to be her husband had transformed into the most authentic relationship Aurora had ever experienced. And as the sun set over their neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Aurora felt wealthy in ways that had nothing to do with her bank account and everything to do with the hands she held and the hearts that had welcomed her into their family. If you believe that what's genuine will always find its way to someone's heart, subscribe to Solo Parent Stories for more stories that will warm your heart.